Welcome to the Battle Buddy Podcast with Keith McKeever.
Welcome back to another episode of the Battle Buddy Podcast. I am joined by an author and a fellow podcaster, a fellow Illinoisan. I got author Jennifer Hobbs here with me today. Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It is a pleasure.
That is. I've been so excited to have this conversation. One of the things I do as a podcaster is I won't usually have an author on unless I've read their book. Of course, I didn't read your book. I listened to it. Did the audio version, multitasking,
Yeah.
But there is a lot to unpack in your story because, well, for starters, it's an interesting way that you wrote it. And it's from your perspective and your husband's perspective, and it flips back and forth. And then as you're listening to it, I guess in my case, it was like, wow, this is really unique because it's not just a story about being a veteran or being in war. It's past relationships, rocky relationships, growing up, war, falling in love, trying to figure that out while in a combat zone and the complexities of it. And what really hit me was, I don't think it's a super unique, it's unique to you, but I think that there's a lot of people that deployed and ended up falling in love with somebody. Maybe those relationships didn't last. I know you and your husband are still together after many years now, but some people, people get together and date when they're in the war zone. We all saw that.
Right.
So I think that there's a little something that every veteran of our generation can kind of pull from it and see something. So, but before we get started, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm Jennifer Hobbs. Prior to marrying my husband, Ryan Hobbs, I got to give space and a shout out to my maiden name, Buffington, because in the military, being Buffington, everyone is too lazy to say my last name, so they just called me Buff. So a lot of people know me as Jen Buff, even people that I went to high school with. So many nicknames, Buff and Booty, Booze Sniffer, not that they came from anywhere. It's just, there's so much you could do with it. And so, I started as Jen Buff in my, when I joined the military at 17 years old. I pretty much knew by 16 that I was going to join. And so I joined when I was still in high school, and it was only a couple of years before my unit, transportation unit out of Paris, Illinois. Shout out to Paris. We were mobilized, and we actually, as you read, and anyone who reads in the book, we didn't go the first time that they mobilized us. We just packed all our stuff up, told us Happy Valentine's Day, and sent us on our way home. And then about 9 months later, that was when they called us on Veterans Day and told us once again we were getting mobilized. And so I was mobilized at 19 years old. I turned 20 and 21 on the deployment, as did quite a few other people in my unit. A lot of people from Central Illinois, most of which were between the ages of 19 and 26. And so that started the beginning of a year that would just pretty much change my life. A year, I describe it as the worst year of my life, but the best year of my life. And, the worst year being that it was the most traumatic year as far as really getting thrown into a combat zone young, and all those hard emotions and all of that comes with it. But the best year of my life, because number one, I take away from that deployment some of the most monumental relationships that I have in my life that mean so much to me and help shape who I am. But also the best year of my life because, again, it helped to shape who I was. It helped me to find, to just now, 18 years later, to have grown to a place to where I taste the sweet taste of life better, and I have more gratefulness for it, and it just helps me to really try and grow myself and just continue on a path of being the person I want to be. And so now I spent 12 years in education. 7 were in special education, and the other 5 were in general education. And then after writing my book in that year of much self-reflection and personal growth, I reignited this flame that's been burning inside of me for like 8 years. And that is to find where and how I can best help veterans and their families. And I just know that, when it finally came time for me to make that decision, I just knew it was the right decision. I knew it, and I was like, how can I make this happen? And so I'm like laying all this out, like, oh my gosh, a lot of fear comes at you at that point. Like, Jennifer, you're completely crazy. You have 2 master's degrees in teaching, 12 years. You're saying goodbye to a pension. All that fear that can come your way. And on top of the fear that was already overwhelming me with writing a book. But in that place of reflection, I knew that I needed to step out of the fear and into this space where I'm going to continue following the path of who I know I'm meant to be. And so this past year has been my first year after resignation, and I have started my own podcast, which I never thought that I would do. But as I pondered it more and realized I got a whole lot to say and I want to help other people with all they have to say. And I can't make all that happen in books. I guess I could, but I do want to keep writing, but I also want to give space for other people to be able to share their stories and their journeys so we can continue to offer hope to other people and also give people a space to be able to relate, and then also like let down these stigmas and start having conversations about what is really going on, and face it head on, and grow together as a society. And so got the podcast. I'm wrapping up book 2, almost to the editing phase, which I'm not excited about. I like to write, Keith. I don't like to proofread.
Hey, I am with you there. I am working on a book myself, more on the real estate side of things for veterans. But yeah, I'm not looking forward to that. I'm going to have somebody else do all the editing and all the proofreading and stuff. Let me just get my thoughts down and let them finally massage it and make it look good.
Yes.
Because I went to public schools. English and grammar was never my thing. My wife is my editor-in-chief. Gotta have somebody like that.
Fantastic. That's so great to hear.
Well, she tells me all the time to correct my grammar and stuff in Facebook posts.
Yeah.
You forgot an apostrophe here. It's not my strong suit, for crying out loud. I think people get what I'm trying to say.
Right.
I may miss something here and there, like one thing, But yeah, it's a heck of a process. But it's awesome that you got your story down. And it's interesting you kind of mentioned growth. Obviously, that's in the title, Calmed Growth After Trauma. I've got it scrolling at the bottom. And I'll have in the show notes as well, the link where people can find it on Amazon. Mm-hmm. But you picked a really good title and title that in, because there wasn't much that was calm. Like your life was hectic as a young adult, and relationships and stuff like that. But so what was the defining moment that made you sit down and say, I have to write this story?
Good question. It was me like hitting a dark place again. 2 years ago, I woke up in the ICU, and I had fainted and cracked my skull. And in the following months of dealing with, I cracked my skull in 2 places. I fainted backwards, and just all this, 90 pounds I got, not really, all this weight going back and smacking the back of my head off of the ground. Oh my goodness, like broke the strongest part of my skull. And then the impact alone caused a crack on the left side of my head. And so in those months following that, 4 days later, I was supposed to be catching a plane to go be in my best friend's wedding. That didn't happen, obviously. And then they had to get a teacher to cover my classroom for 2 months as I was home recovering from this excruciating pain that was just constantly throbbing and lights and sounds, all that stimulation, it was far too much. So you can only imagine what it's like when, you know, your 3 kids get home from school and your husband and your spouse. Like
There
it
is
was
never a quiet moment in the house at that point.
no, and that's oh man, like trying to enjoy your kids, but like wanting earmuffs on and the lights turned off. That's was super difficult. And so in the following months, as I was trying to right as I was about to go back to school, I got cleared by the neurologist, and although I was super afraid to go back to work just because of everything, right? The pain was excruciating. I was afraid I was going to faint again. I realized like it's going to be okay. Like if I'm there and something goes wrong, I just need to let them know I need someone to cover. A help of a colleague helped to, you know, pump me up and get ready to go back. And so just as I was anticipating going back on a Monday and my neurologist appointment was on like a Thursday or Friday, the state of Illinois quarantined the whole state. Oh, well, Pritzker quarantined the whole state. And suddenly here I thought I was going to go back to a little bit of normalcy. And then my life was far from normal, recovering from a head injury and being a virtual teacher and a virtual parent. It was all not exactly what I was expecting, and didn't handle it with grace. Tried to get, I mean, I did. I got back in the flow of teaching. It was so great to see my students. And then once the year wrapped up, still just being in a place where I don't know. It was like I needed to find some normalcy. I couldn't taste, I couldn't smell, you know, lights, sounds, everything was just brutal. And in an attempt to feel a little bit of normalcy, I thought I would, you know, have a beer. And that was a terrible idea. I couldn't taste at all. And so like that just was not a good idea. I couldn't taste it. And so that one went down well. And so did the next, you know, however many. And then so it was in the end of May that I just identified like, good grief, I do not want to be this person. Like, this isn't me. I know I'm just built for so much more. And I have goals, hopes, dreams, aspirations. Where's that person? Where's that Jennifer? And so it was then that I was like, all right, I need to set some goals. And being a teacher, I knew like we don't need to set like 10 goals, right? Like that's way too much. We need to start small. And so I wrote it down in my notes, and I said like tackle debt, and number 2, get back to writing, which was super random considering my writing efforts were very sporadic over the last 18 years and really were just more as a coping mechanism. But something in me told me I wanted to get back to writing. And so from there, in that dark place, it started to grow a little bit, and a lot of different things watered it. And fortunately, I persevered, and I came over all that fear, which is a big deal for us, any of us doing anything. Like fear is a beast. And so being able to just identify that you're better than that fear is a huge, huge obstacle in itself.
It is kind of scary sometimes, whether you're talking about it or I guess writing about it. I haven't done that yet, but to share your stories, you know, for such a pivotal moment in our young lives, to be in a combat zone, all the crazy stuff, you know, that what we all see is all different, but it all affects us in all kinds of crazy ways. And it's kind of hard to open that up. It's easy in the veteran community to talk because we all know in some way, like we understand.
Absolutely.
But in the civilian world, to open that up where a civilian could pick up your book and read and hear your story and just be like, wow, like that's crazy. That's incredible. You know, there's like this vulnerability to it that it's kind of scary to do that.
It really is. And, you know, I wonder, I tiptoe around saying this, but I wonder, like, what would it have looked like if my husband and I didn't marry? Would I have been in a place where I felt comfortable to be vulnerable? Would I have been supported like that? hopefully, yes. And I tiptoe around saying that because I don't want anybody listening to this or watching this to think that you need to be married to a veteran or someone who's had your same struggle in order to put your story down, because that's so not the case. But fortunately, when I told my husband that I wanted to take my story and make it a dual memoir, which was a great suggestion by my book coach, because as I'm telling her about like certain events, she's like, wow, so he was here and you were here while that happened. And then she had made the suggestion, wow, it would be really incredible if you made it like a dual memoir. And so I owe that credit to her. And luckily, when I approached him with it, he was on board, and I was so grateful for that. But through all those conversations throughout the year or less of digging deep into those places, you could just tell that it was therapeutic for both of us separately, but also together. So it was a really great experience to take something that was traumatic that you try and bury into the depths of your mind and bring it to the forefront, to put it out there and identify that that doesn't make your future. Like your past does not shape your future necessarily.
Sure, it helps because you were both there together, or basically there together for most of that deployment, and to be able to kind of pull that up when 16, 17, 18 years later and discuss it when you're more mature and you've had time to reflect on it. I'm sure I can see where that'd be really healing.
And you know what?
Talk about those things.
I would love to tell you. So when you were talking about Calmed being a great title, wow. So the way that I got that title, which you may have caught it in the book, and I'm not sure. I wonder how many people even catch it in the book. But when I heard this statement from my husband, it hit me like a ton of bricks, and I just knew that needed to be the title. And what it was, in my book, when I'm talking about the night where he was hit by a roadside bomb, and he gets finally out, or they get him out from under the truck that he was trapped under, and he's in and out of consciousness, and he's finally on the medevac. And I asked him, because he was letting me know that another one of our sergeants was in that same truck and was on that medevac. And I asked my husband, like, did you see him? Did you hear him? How did you know he was on that medevac? And it was so profound, because it's so not even words that would come out my husband's mouth. So it just made it that even stronger. But he said, or I don't think I said that right. It just made it even strong. It just made it stronger. He said, I couldn't see him. I couldn't hear him. It was just that I knew someone I knew was there, because I just felt calmed. And that's, I was mystified. Like, that was such an amazing, intuitive feeling and intuitive thought to speak out loud. And I was like, wow, that is perfect. Especially, as I'm taking a look at, this traumatic year and all the aftermath, but then getting to a place where you are calmed and you're still going to have this trauma, but you're calmed a little bit and you're ready to take it on. And so that's where that title came from.
Yeah, I remember catching that part in there.
Good.
And, yeah, so we got one person that did, at least. But yes, that would be very calming to know that you've got somebody that that you're not alone.
Yeah.
And I think that's what helps people. Obviously, I mean, that's why my podcast is called the Battle Buddy Podcast, to let people know that they're not alone. I
love the name of it. And
that no matter what you're going through, somebody else has been through something. Probably one of the reasons why I've been excited to have this conversation with you about your book, because there's so many little aspects, like I said earlier, that every veteran of our war can kind of know and understand. The idea of convoys and roadside bombs and injuries and, just knowing the general environment. Every base is different, but you kind of, everybody knows what a HESCO barrier and a T-wall is. And, just things like that. It just connects. And then I think, there's this audience of military spouses or people, like I said earlier, that found some sort of romance while at war can understand it because it's unique to our generation. If you think about it, I read a lot of books when I was in high school about the Vietnam War, and anytime they really reference women in there, it's the nurse or, ladies working the streets in the village. I mean, it's like that is the reference to women because women just weren't really there. But in our generation, more and more as time even went on, you got more and more women serving and more on those front line and sharing those same experiences. So, I mean, I remember a lot of people that were dating, here and there. Oh, this person's dating, 3 months later, they're dating somebody else or whatever. But it's a unique perspective. I think a lot of people can know. And
we have a couple marriages. We have a couple marriages that came out of our deployment. We had 160 people in our unit, and probably, if I remember right, the number of girls is like 40.
I would imagine it's much more likely to be that way in a guard unit like you were, where when you come home, you're in the same neighborhood bumping into these people you work with in the grocery store, gas station, etc. So I was kind of curious about that too. Your husband, obviously he was on board. How much did he actually help you in writing? And then how much did reaching out to some of your battle buddies, did you reach out to them to kind of fill in blanks on stories?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I hope with my third book in the future, if it ends up being, not number 3, but a different one, I really hope to get different perspectives of the war at home. But my husband and I, it was through a lot of conversations where I knew where I wanted to get his side of the story with things. And so I would put my phone on voice recording, and we would just sit there and have a conversation, some of which were super uncomfortable, some of which like he didn't even remember. And then next thing you know, 18 years later, like he's mad at me, we're arguing, and that kind of hot mess. But as far as my battle buddies, like in addition to reaching out to, see if I could use their name, but I was also like in my book, I used portions of what was spoken at Jessica Covey's memorial. And so being able to honor her with those amazing words that people spoke there was such an honor to do on her behalf. But I also, hope that my battle buddies realize just how amazing their words were. But as far as getting a lot of people's perspectives, that's kind of been going on for just 18 years, right? I remain friends with quite a few people, and we started out having like a reunion every year, and then we voted on making it a non-for-profit. And so now we have Veterans of Log-Based Sites, which I'm wearing the shirt right now.
That's an interesting idea.
Yeah, so we started Veterans of Log-Based Sites, and because we served on a base called Log-Based Sites, we lived there. And so through those conversations over 18 years, that's just all the stuff that continues to remain with me, and that I carry with me, and that it helped me to put it all together to the best of my ability in this book. But I did find, the hardest part I found with my book was talking about the war at home and everything that came afterwards. Once I got there, I was like, holy moly, this is a whole nother story in itself. And so that's where book number 2 will go. But I definitely did get the perspective of like my father-in-law, which I call my soda pop. We call him soda pop. And like, I had told a story in there about one night when they're fishing. And so I kind of wanted to get his perspective. I also got their perspective on when they got called from Germany and basically were told that Ryan wasn't going to make it, and they were about to put him on a plane, them on a plane. So that's stuff that will again it'll be highlighted when I look at the war at home and how it affects, how it ripples into everyone else's lives for years to come, not just while we are in Iraq, but how your wife has to deal with you for the rest of your life. No, just kidding. But like, for example, like on my podcast, I do Thursdays with my battle buddy Perry the Wild Man, and we were having a chat recently about Santa or Stalin, and just talking about how like our brains are different for the people who have post-traumatic stress, and how sometimes our reaction, it does not fit the stimulus. It's like an overreaction,
or the
and
expected reaction that
yes,
civilians or people without it would.
right.
Yeah.
And we were talking about that, and I was telling him an example of a Stalin moment I had recently where like I bought my daughter one of those like $6 pink drinks from Starbucks, and it ended up all over the floor in my garage. And ooh, overreaction on my part. But I was I'm in touch enough with myself to see it as it was happening. I'm like, oh my gosh, this was definitely not a Santa moment for me. And so again, like my kids see these things in me and my husband, and that's just something that's a part of their life, and they will always be, children of military parents. And so like, that combat, that trauma, it just ripples into the lives of everyone else for a lifetime. And what we do with it is, what's really going to determine the outcome of it. I love that you call your podcast Battle Buddy Podcast, because, I think it's really important, especially one of the things that I've really started to dive into through personal development in the last year, that like it is up to us, like how we deal with, like respond to things, and what we do with what we've been given and what we've gone through. However, you don't do it alone. Like we are not put in a world, in a life, in a body where you're expected to take that stuff on your own. You need that support. You need that support system. You need that battle buddy.
That you do. And boy, you said ripple, and that really hits close to home, because I for years did not. I had complete blinders on that. Anything I did, any of that stuff was wrong, because the whole Santa Stalin thing. I always kind of saw what TV portrays PTSD
right
as, punching your wife and pushing her down the stairs. Like,
right.
It sounds graphic and terrible, but like that's unfortunately what TV and movies try to portray. That wasn't me. I never punched a hole in the wall, never hit anybody, but I would have those moments where I just snap right into action, or a snappy comment, or just get really angry, or the opposite, to the point where I would just shut my mouth and self-isolate in my office, play video games, try to ignore the world, just ignore the problem away. But when those blinders come off, it's like ripping a Band-Aid off a fresh wound. It stings. It stings really, really hard. But you can't grow until you do that, until you realize what you're doing. And it is weird to see. I'm still working on it. Sometimes I see it, sometimes I don't. But to see in the process of doing something, that you're doing something wrong, that your response to it's not normal, quote unquote normal, whatever normal is these days. Then you can be like, okay, all right, calm down, breathe, try some tips, step away for a couple of minutes, get away from the environment, whatever. And then, the key is to go back and not self-isolate. But that's a hard thing to be around kids, because that was one of my thoughts was, I was like, I got to get a handle on this the best I can, because I don't want my kids to grow up and to say, oh, I had a great dad, but my dad did this, my dad did that. That's like the worst thing. It's like you don't want that on the children. So it sounds like we're both kind of in the same place of trying to navigate all that.
Right. It just continues.
We're going to probably have to continue to do that for years. Maybe the rest of our lives, try and navigate that. But,
And
We're not
but
alone.
it is so good, and it's a celebration that you and myself and anyone else who's at the point to rip that Band-Aid off, because that Band-Aid is like duct tape. Like, I love duct tape. Don't get me wrong. But we have to be like an architect of our own life and rebuild these thoughts. Like, you're never going to be able to remove them. You have to rebuild it. You have to know, like, okay, I need to breathe. Like, okay, like, pause for a minute. You have to rebuild all that. You have to reshape the memories, and which is it's totally a long process. Like, even those words right there saying you have to reshape your mindset and those thoughts, like, someone's head is spinning right now, just as mine was when that was first said to me. Like, I get it. It's a process, and give yourself some grace to work through it.
Absolutely. You just got to find a different path ahead. So, but back to the book, you kind of had some interesting chapters in there, rocky relationships and
Good
love
grief.
at war, and that was a unique perspective. But kind of curious what kind of feedback you've had, on that part, maybe
I'm
on the
I'm
romance
glad
side.
you asked, because that is hilarious. It makes me think of something that's hilarious. So, as far as feedback on me being honest about my struggle with relationships, and really just trying to fill a void with that kind of stuff, whether it stems from, growing up without a dad, or if it stems just from dealing with my own hot mess of the transition back. Either way, it wasn't pretty. And it definitely wasn't pretty and comfortable to put it down on paper for the world to read. But I knew that when I was going to put my story down, that I wasn't going to sugarcoat it. Actually, there was times where I thought about removing stuff, and I was like, no, I mean, it is what it is. This is life. And if I'm going to be honest and put a story down, then I don't want anyone to look at it and be like, oh, why is she making herself out to be so wonderful? That tramp broke my heart. Like, I get it. So the only things that a lot of people I've gotten so much great feedback about the book, and how relationships, help to foster my sanity over the years. But really, when it comes specifically to relationships, I will be totally honest with you. Only two pieces of feedback come to mind. Number one, back in July when it first published, one of my battle buddies, who I wasn't really good friends with on the deployment, because she was actually like, she was higher up. She was like head of the talk, like she was the main communication person. And I was just some chump 19-year-old, so like I didn't really have much communication with her other than like admin type things. She reached out to me in July and just rocked my world with her feedback, just talking about how she had been really struggling through some stuff, and after reading my book, like, she could totally relate. She was having the same issues and just was kind of blaming it all on everything else, whether it was them or herself. And then she came to the realization that, like, that it's okay, and to identify that, like, um I'm trying to think of what she said, but like being able to use that struggle to move on. And she just basically said that she realized that she was, coping with relationships and stuff like that. So, and she says that my book changed her life, and actually over the last year her life has changed dramatically. And she has since, like, left a very, very, very unhealthy relationship, stepped into a completely different life where now she has confidence in herself, and she knows that, like, she's going to be okay, and she can be the person she knows she is. And now she's dedicating every day to volunteering for a non-for-profit veteran organization called Mattersville, where they rescue wolf dogs and help build ground to be a self-sustainable life. Now, the other piece of feedback that I got recently, not as squishy feeling as that one, it was a little bit more harsh, but I was on again, though, I'm not going to sugarcoat this stuff. I could keep this to myself, but I'm not that person. I was on a Wounded Warriors woman social group call recently, and one of the gals, like, I don't know all of them very well. I've probably been on that social group like 4 times. And one of the gals was like, "Oh, Jennifer, I read your book. I told you I was going to read it. I read your book." I was like, "Thank you." I kind of knew from that statement that since it didn't go much further, that like I was a little afraid to ask,
Is
but
sort of butt coming or something?
And I was like, "How did you?" I said, "Thank you so much for your support. Like, how did you like it?" And she was like, I was kind of lost with all your relationships. Like, good God, how'd you get that many boyfriends? And I just kind of giggled, and I was like, "Yeah, so you liked it? I don't know. No?" Like, and then I just kind of laughed, and I was like, "Honestly, like, I don't feel like it was a lot of." I'm like, "Okay, yeah, I did mention quite a few in there." And then a little bit, so she didn't really give me much feedback there. And then a little bit later, she says, "But I'm still kind of confused. So you got blown up, you got sent back to the United States, and then you got sent back to Iraq again?" And I said, "No, no, no, no. Like, I didn't get blown up. My husband got blown up." And she's like, "Oh, that makes more sense. Oh, I don't know. I was listening to it on Audible while I was cleaning the house. Maybe it's my fault." And so then I was like, "Okay,
May have missed a
maybe
few things then.
maybe you missed a few things, and maybe you only caught, like boyfriend A, boyfriend B, boyfriend C, whatever. Either way, like,
Yeah,
I appreciate the feedback. And honestly, the only way that any of us will become better writers or better realtors or better at anything we do is if you give us the honest to God truth, and I give it its space. So
absolutely.
that
I
is
guess I
the
could see
only
that.
two. That's the only two things as far as relationships that I got back, as far as all the different ones I highlighted. God, it sounds so terrible saying it out loud. But if you're listening to this and you're watching this, it's not that I talk all about, like being a hussy and having boyfriends. Like, I just talk about um trying to cope with building a relationship with people, but I had never gotten over old Mr. Hobbs. Like, I kept trying to cover a wound with a Band-Aid, and finally, when I realized that I needed to rip it off and not use duct tape, then it was then that I stopped talking about other
Yeah, I
relationships.
think you kind of have to go back and give some of that backstory, and I mean, you gave a little bit of your husband's backstory too. I mean, it's two perspectives, two people's
Hmm.
lives that intertwine for a very short period of your lives together, and you know, you're
Yeah,
18 years later. There's still more chapters of the book to be written. So,
really.
but yeah, I could see that really on the feedback on the audio. If you get busy and you start listening to it, you may lose the fact that it's two
Right.
perspectives, and you may be getting the stories confused. But
Yes. And I just reached out to the company who I submitted my audiobook, and I asked them, "Can I add a track at the beginning that says this is a dual memoir? Some of the chapters are told by Hobbs, and they said I could." So I'm going to go add a track in there, because I know, like, because it doesn't say that, if you're not paying close attention, or if you're not holding the book in your hand, you may not catch that Jen is the chapters told by my perspective, whereas Hobbs are the chapters told from my husband's perspective.
it's an interesting thing to think about, because it could be that way too if you have if there's another author out there that was maybe writing a book about multiple people's perspectives of an incident. The audiobook may lose some of that translation if you don't have that sound bite in the beginning, or maybe in the beginning of the
Yeah.
chapter. If it's like 10 or 15 people's stories,
Yep.
you might want to put that in there. So
Like Wonder. Oh, I love this book, and it has like 8 different perspectives in it, and so it probably is a good thing to just give that little heads up at the beginning so people can track.
yeah, especially if you're listening to it where you can't associate it with seeing it. So,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, it's it's an interesting book, and I can't wait to see what you have in book 2. About that ripple effect and coming home, because that's going to be really, really interesting to read.
Yes. Well, so what I really wanted for book 2 was I wanted to be able to highlight that ripple effect in the war at home. And as I looked at the pages and pages that I had wrote, I was like, oh man, so this is more of my perspective of the war at home. And I want to talk to a lot more people and do a lot more research. And so then I realized, like, the war at home is not ready for book 2. Like, I need more time to research and more time to talk to people not even on my unit, not even in my unit. And so book 2 is really just the war at home, only from my perspective. And um, it will be called, I'm still working on my subtitle. I think I know what it's going to be, but the main title will be Triggered, which I think we can all relate to.
Yep, I can see that. Yeah, kind of a logical fit.
Triggered by the pink drink.
So your podcast, Celebrate the Struggle, is that part of getting those other stories for you?
Yes, it
All the
is. And
connections.
it was definitely one of the purposes of starting it. However, I also don't want to only limit it to veterans and their families. So, like, recently I had a gal on there that has cerebral palsy, and she has a Lingraphia that she pre-programmed her answers into. And so, again, just giving space to show that we all have struggle. It all looks completely different. Let's give it its space and show our perseverance and resiliency through it. And so for stories like hers, or people who have fought cancer, or people living without limbs, or people who are survivors of assault and rape, just anything and everything to talk about, the things that maybe are tiptoed around or maybe have stigmas around them. But I really haven't gotten too many. I have tried to reach out to, like, people with MST. I'm in some groups to try and see if I can help get their stories out, even if it's anonymous. And people are just aren't willing yet with that, and that's totally fine. So
I
so
think it'll
far,
always be a tough topic to get people to open up about. I've had
yeah.
a couple of guests on here talk about it, and I try to be really careful about that. Like, really make sure that I've had a conversation with a couple of times. Like, are you comfortable with this?
Right.
Like, I have them kind of share their story. I try not to pry and ask too many deep questions, just because you never know. But I admire the strength of any woman or man that would come forward
I
with a
know.
story of that. That would be a really tough one to come forward on.
Yes. I have had a couple of guests on that have spoke about it without me asking, and that's a good point to make. Even if we're not talking about MST, and for those of you that don't know what that is, that's military sexual trauma, but even just having other people on here that are talking about Iraq or something else, you don't really ask too many questions because you don't want them to get uncomfortable. It's really just letting them be comfortable to share whatever they want to. I had a wife on recently, a wife of one of my battle buddies. I really wanted to have her on because after I had him on, I was like, man, your wife sounds pretty awesome. I need to get her on here and share her perspective. And then it turned out that, like, she had struggled for years with an eating disorder, to the point to where she was about to have a heart attack. And so just all these different conversations, like speaking them out loud, it's going to help somebody. And that's why I wanted to give space to Celebrate the Struggle to do that.
It'll definitely help some people. I mean, heck, even your book helped somebody, right? Somebody that you knew. My podcast, I always had those thoughts of, like, I don't know who it's going to help, when or
Right.
where, and in what ways, but I've been approached by some people that are quite literally right here in my own backyard, that have benefited by some of the episodes, spouses and veterans. So it's pretty cool to know,
It really is.
it can be played anywhere around the world on any kind of device, and yet in your own backyard, you're affecting people's lives in a positive way. So I got no doubt that, especially the episodes of yours that I've listened to, a lot of fascinating stories. And I think it's powerful for people to hear those, because I don't necessarily always go this deep, but I do appreciate those ones where people really open up and get kind of deep and vulnerable on things, because that's where people relate. It's those emotions that they do feel. So
exactly. And when you're authentic and vulnerable like that, when people are able to relate to it, and it's then that we can help them. If that's what they're there for, if not, if they're just there to hear some great radio, some great conversations and learn stuff. And that's the mission too, for people to learn and become enlightened.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's definitely a great platform for you to start having some conversations with other veterans and figure out what people's struggles are and help you write that other book.
Yes.
And help people in other ways. So can't wait to read book 2 and 3 and maybe whatever else you got in the future.
Right.
Maybe by the time you get book 3 done, maybe I'll have book 1 done. Who knows? It's a very slow process.
I hear you. And
so
I try and read like 3 at a time. It's ridiculous.
No, I never do that. I try it just one.
Well, it depends on what mood I'm in. Like, I'm reading one for research, I'm reading one for pleasure, and then I have one on Audible for when I'm in the car.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's usually just one at a time. I just kind of pick a topic, and I like Audible. That's my way to go about things, because I'm on the road a lot, or sitting down, or mowing the lawn, which we'll start that season here real soon. And hey, it takes me about an hour, so I can get through 1 or 2 podcast episodes of different people. So it's great time to do it and listen to it.
It's great multitasking.
That it is. So once again, Jennifer, I appreciate you stopping by and sharing about your book and your podcast. And I'll say, if anybody out there has a story that you maybe want to tell on her podcast or mine, reach out to us. All your Jennifer's contact information will be in the show notes, and reach out and see what we can do.
Please do. And thank you so much for having me on here. Keep up the good work. And everyone, make sure that you subscribe to Battle Buddy Podcast.
Well, thank you. Just took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to play that right in. Don't forget to subscribe and follow. And for both of us, absolutely. So I appreciate you stopping by, Jennifer.
Thanks for having me, Keith. You have a fabulous day.
You too.
Battle.
All right, folks, don't forget to check out our website, battlebuddypodcast.net, for all sorts of resources. And if you are struggling, there's a National Suicide Hotline number is 800-273-8255, or you can text 838-255.